Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
All right, everybody, peace. Welcome to the GSMC Basketball Podcast Show, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As you guys know, I'm your host, Casuan, and I hope you all had an amazing weekend. I hope you guys were able to catch up on lots of rest, and I hope you guys had a great start to your week with this wonderful Monday. We've got a lot to talk about on the show today, guys. We've got a lot of WNBA action that we're going to cover, with a couple of those matchups being between the Aces and the Sky and the Lynx and the Sun. And we're also going to broach the question of what exactly it means to be like water. What does it mean to be like water? And why is that important for not just your personal life, but also your professional life as well? And to start the show, though, guys, we're going to cover some recent news that's come out in the NBA, and that's the Warriors planning to work out Dwight Howard. But before we get started, guys, if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button as well, so you guys can stay up to date on all of our latest content. Be sure to subscribe to us on Patreon as well, so you can get access to all of our exclusive content that we post daily. You can do so by going to patreon.com, clicking on the search bar, and typing in GSMC Sports Network. And if you'd like to support our network and our company, you can do so by following the link in the ticker below. It's streamelements.com/GSMC/sportsnetwork./tip. Once again, it's streamelements.com/GSMC sportsnetwork./tip. None of this is possible without you guys, the fans. So we're just so grateful for all the support, all the love, and all the everything that you guys show us and that you guys give us. We're just so grateful. And it's an honor to use this platform to spread insight and knowledge on the game of basketball from a slightly different perspective that you won't get anywhere else. So, I'm just grateful that you guys are tuning in. So thank you guys so much. With that being said, though, let's hop right into it, guys. So we've got some interesting news to cover in the NBA. As I just stated, the Warriors do plan on bringing in free agent Dwight Howard. For those of you who don't know, Dwight Howard recently spent last season in Taiwan, playing for the Leopards. I remember the mascot name, but I don't remember the city name. It was but it was the Leopards, and I'm sure quite a few of you saw his astronomical stats that he was putting up. I mean, putting up 73 points, 20 rebounds, 20 assists, and 10 blocks. Stat lines akin to that. And quick caveat, I hope that shows people, one, how talented the NBA is, but also two, how talented overseas basketball is. So Dwight Howard, one of the all-time greats, will be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Should have been a top 75 player. I know why he wasn't in the top 75, but it's all about narrative in the media when it came to that. But I want to digress a little bit. I hope that those stat lines that Dwight Howard put up shows how talented the NBA players are. Even though the 15th man on a 15-man roster in the NBA would be phenomenal, astronomically better than anyone else, any average Joe Blow. But also, this shows that there's a lot of talent in overseas basketball for Dwight Howard to say, listen, I find this a commensurate league, good enough league for me to go over and stay in shape and still play against some sort of level of talent. I say it all the time that there's a lot of talent in overseas basketball, and there are guys that play overseas that should be playing in the NBA. But when it comes to the NBA, a lot of it is branding, and I don't want to use the word politics, but it's more so branding and who your agent knows and who knows your agent, and can the team market you. Even when it comes to getting on the G League team, or when it comes to getting a 2-way contract, all that plays a factor. Like, who's more marketable? Who are the fans gonna be more likely to gravitate towards? Who has a more appealing presence in the media? Things like that play a factor when teams are signing not just 15, the guys on the lower end of the roster, but also 2-way players and guys that are in the rotation. All that plays a factor when teams are signing these guys. And what you start to notice is, and I'm only saying this from experience, is that the higher you get, the higher level you get in sports, in basketball specifically, the higher the league you get, is less about your skill set and more so about your marketability, especially in the NBA. I won't give out my guy's name, but one of my guys, good friend of mine, we work out together during the off season. He was playing with the G League team for the Cavs, and he was in position to make a roster spot with Cleveland, get one of those final roster spots. However, they ended up giving that roster spot to someone else because that guy was more marketable than my friend. And that was the only reason that he didn't make that Cavs roster. He ended up playing for the G League affiliate for the Cavs, and ended up doing great things for the G League team. But however, things like that play a factor, and it's less so about your skill set and more so about who's easier to market, who are the fans going to gravitate towards, who is it easier to put in a commercial, or who's it easier to put on a billboard, because you're an asset at that point, and you had to bring in money not just on the court for the team, but also off the court as well. And I have another quick example as well. I have another friend of mine that in the summer of 2021 was on the Lakers Summer League roster, and was in position to make that roster, the final 15-man roster. However, that last spot ended up being given to Matt McClung, because Matt McClung's agent was friends with Rich Paul, who we all know is LeBron's agent and runs his agency. And so that sort of networking, and who do you know and who does your agent know, that all plays a factor when it comes to getting these roster spots. And not only that, but also Matt McClung was more marketable and more of a household name than our friend was, who was in contention to make that last roster spot. And especially in a market like LA, it's all about branding. It's all about building your brand up and your name off the court. So who is going to be easier to market? And Matt McClung was the easier choice for that. And also because, like I said, Matt McClung's agent was good friends with Rich Paul, and all that plays a factor when it comes to getting these roster spots, getting on a roster spot in the NBA. And that's part of the business that no one speaks about, no one talks about. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people don't talk about. One, because they can't, because they don't want to put people under the bus, and they don't want to quote unquote expose anybody. But man, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind those doors, and in those signing rooms. And it's less about basketball than it ever was, and more so just about who you know and your branding, who are you able to market more. And Dwight Howard is another example of that, where it's no question that Dwight's leadership and Dwight's veteran presence could be used in the locker room on one of these 30 NBA teams. And the fact that he's getting a roster or getting a workout with the Warriors right now is unfortunate, because it should have never come to this. Dwight's a first ballot Hall of Famer, like I said, multiple Defensive Player of the Years, multiple all-defensive first teams, led a team to the NBA Finals. Dwight's no question one of the best centers of all time, arguably top 5 center of all time. If you ask me, he's top 5 center of all time. No question about it, top 75 player of all time. But however, he doesn't get a lot of that recognition, a lot of those accolades, because he doesn't have the best image, and the media doesn't portray him in the best light. And all that goes into factor when developing a Hall of Fame career. Were you charismatic with the media? Were you able to develop a cult of personality? That's why Kareem, I have him as the second greatest player of all time, but that's why he'll never be in contention for the greatest player of all time, because he was so he was so almost dismissive to the media, and he was so not obtuse, but very standoffish towards the media, and he lacked that sort of charisma when it came to interacting with the media. And that's something you see quite often with players and people that are highly intelligent. They don't necessarily tend to worry about developing that charismatic nature or having a warming personality, or a personality that people gravitate towards. And you see that a lot amongst people that are highly intelligent. And Kareem was just like that. And that all plays a factor in developing yourself for one of the greatest players of all time. And the difference between Dwight was charismatic, but however, when Dwight got to LA, his rapport with Kobe Bryant is when people's perception of Dwight started to shift, because people, especially in LA, were so, they loved Kobe so much. Anything that went against Kobe or didn't align with what Kobe saw, they saw it as the enemy. They saw it as something that was not less than, but they would denigrate it. And so that's what they did with Dwight Howard. Dwight and Kobe bumped heads, and so they ran Dwight's image and persona into the ground from the media. And that's why he didn't have those sort of issues, he wasn't portrayed that way in the media before he got to LA. And then it was hard for him to shake that stigma all throughout his career, even after he left LA. And it's because of the issues he had with Kobe. And it seems that, it doesn't see. This is a prime example of how that can have how all of this affects the marketability and the media persona and the cult of personality. All that plays a factor into getting a job. And Dwight is a perfect example of how talent won't always be able to get you a job. And there's no question that Dwight can play he could be on somebody's roster in the NBA right now. And I hope that everything goes well with this tryout, and that he's able to show that he is still in shape and that he can be a contributing factor on NBA roster, because he's shown that he has the ability to play in a reserved role and to come off the bench. I mean, he did it with the Lakers on their championship team, and he doesn't have to. He's not going to be too big of a presence in the locker room where he can't play in a reserved role, because he showed that he's been able to do that before. And he's no question will be able to do that in Golden State as well. But that's all we have on that topic, guys. In our next segment, we're going to be covering some recent WNBA action. The Aces and their dominant performance against the Sky in that series. We're going to cover that, and also we're going to discuss the concept of what it means to actually be like water. So guys, stick around. You're not going to miss any of that. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back. In case you missed our last segment, we discussed the Warriors planning to bring in Dwight Howard for a workout and how that sort of represents the culture in the buying market for the NBA and what guys have to go through in terms of everything that goes on off the court when dealing with trying to get these contracts, and how your skill set and your talent level actually plays little factor in getting a deal. And later on in the show, we're going to be discussing what it actually means to be like water and why that's important, not just in your personal life but also in your professional life as well. But let's talk about some WNBA playoff action, guys, before we get into anything else. But before we get started with that, if you haven't already, be sure to click the subscribe button, hit that like button as well, so you guys can stay up to date on all of our latest content. Be sure to subscribe to us on Patreon as well. You can do so by going to patreon.com, click on the search bar, and typing in GSMC Sports Network, so you can get access to all of our exclusive content that we post daily. And if you would like to support our company and our network, you can do so by following the link in the ticker below. It's streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. Once again, it's streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. None of this is possible without you guys, the fans, so we're just so grateful for everything that you do and for all support and love that you show us. And it's an honor to have this platform. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out the GSMC Baseball Podcast, GSMC College Football Podcast, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, and the GSMC NFL Podcast as well. All of our hosts provide great insight and content and coverage on the sports that they cover, and it's an honor to be working with some of the best in the business. With that being said, guys, let's go ahead and get right into it, okay? So, yesterday, the Aces swept the Chicago Sky in dominant fashion, winning by a score of 92-70. The Aces were led by, Asia Wilson, who had an outstanding 38 points and 10 rebounds to go along with 4 blocks as well. Followed by Alicia Clark coming off the bench, who had 14 points and 6 rebounds herself. And Jackie Young had 15 points and 5 rebounds, 6 assists. Kelsey Plum had 10 points, 2 assists, 2 steals, and a rebound. And Chelsea Gray had 9 points, 9 assists, and 4 rebounds as well. So the biggest... By the way, Asia Wilson also went 8 for 10 from the free throw line. So the big story of this night, this matchup, of this game, was Asia Wilson's dominating performance. And watching the game last night and seeing her performance, even when Chicago would double, she was still able to find her shot. And particularly when they would double from the top as opposed to from the bottom. And what I mean by that is, so if you catch the ball in the low post, right? If you catch it on the low post and say you're on the right block, that help side is that double is normally going to come from inside, meaning that it's coming from the top. So if you're on the low block and the top of you is the middle of the paint, that's where the help side is. So that's where the double is going to come from, and that's what I mean when I say the help comes from the top. If the help is coming from the side instead of the top, it just means that whatever defender is in the corner is going to double you off of when you get the ball in the post. So as opposed to you getting doubled from the top in the block, you're getting doubled from the block and the side. So it's a little bit of a different angle. It's a little harder to score when the help comes, or when the double comes from the top. And because you're turning into that shoulder, you're turning into the middle. But Asia showed immense poise and control to score off of her inside shoulder, which would be her left shoulder if she's on the right block, and scoring going into that double from the top side. And watching her perform, watching her play that game, it reminded me of a couple of other dominant post players from the WNBA that had soft feet and great touch around the rim. A couple of them being Sylvia Fowles, Tina Thompson, and particularly Lisa Leslie. Only difference, though, obviously Asia's left-handed. Those other players were right-handed, but that is what Asia reminded me of in her performance. And what I loved most about her performance is that she didn't settle. What you start to see is, especially with post players that can stretch the floor and have great touch and excellent range going out to like 17, 18 feet, they start to settle for that outside shot when they know they're getting doubled, and they stop attacking the paint. What you saw with Asia, though, every time she got a post entry, she would pivot and face towards the basket and give a jab or a pump and going to the contact on that drive. So she never settled. She never settled for any outside shots. She took a couple outside shots, but she didn't settle. She always looked to get to the basket. She always looked to draw contact, and she always looked to get to the rim. And that was great to see, because it showed that she knows that she can get to her spots whenever she wants to. And her shooting that 17, 18 footer without her being doubled is her settling. That's her settling. And so she understands now the importance of not settling on any possession, and how in the playoffs each possession is that much more important. So you have to be much more crisp. You have to take advantage of every possession, and you can't take any possessions off, especially in the playoffs. And she's really starting to understand that, and she's no longer settling for any outside shots, because she can get, even when they double, now she knows she can get to the paint, she can get to her spots, she can get to the rim whenever she wants to. And that doesn't always mean having to go up with the shot. It just means having to kicking it out to an Alicia Clark, or to a Chelsea Gray, or to a Kelsey Plum, or to a Jackie Young. All these players who are great shooters. And so she's done a phenomenal job of really having that offense ran through her. I know they run a lot of 4-out, 1-in, and they run a lot of high PNRs and DHOs, particularly from the top of the key. But that offense is ran through Asia, and you see how much space they give her on the 4-out, 1-in motion. But also it's because they have great shooters. I mean, her being surrounded by great shooters and perhaps the greatest backcourt in WNBA history obviously takes a lot of pressure off of her, and it makes it a little easier. But the fact that she's not settling for anything on the offensive end is phenomenal. And her ability to stay disciplined on the defensive end is a sight to see as well. I mean, if we look at her, she only had one foul. She had one foul last night, and she had 4 blocks. As I said, she does an amazing job of staying on her feet, because she knows she normally doesn't have to jump, because her length is so long. She doesn't have to jump to get any blocks, and she does a great job of her reaction time. Her getting what we call her second jump. So I remember one possession in the third quarter where she blocked one shot on a player driving baseline, and then the team got an offensive rebound. As soon as A'ja Wilson landed from her first jump, she jumped right back up and blocked the second shot. And so that, what we call that second jump, her ability to still be explosive on her second jump is bar none. I mean, I haven't seen anything like that in quite a long time, especially from the WNBA. And her reaction time is phenomenal, and her ability, like I said, to generate power for that second jump quickly is something I haven't seen since Candace Parker was in her prime, when she was with the Sparks. And the difference between Candace and A'ja is that A'ja is so much more physical, and she's looking to block those shots, as opposed to Candace. She kind of just was there on the help side, still a great defender, but Asia's looking to is hunting for those block shots, each and every possession. And she's not swiping. Like I said, she's extremely disciplined. She plays walled up at all times, and because she does a good job of bumping too, when her player, the player she's guarding, attacks the basket, she does a good job of bumping, forcing that player to get a wider attack angle. And when you have wider attack angles, it's harder to get to the basket. And so she's almost riding out the player she's guarding, forcing her player to shoot a more difficult shot. And this is why A'ja Wilson's one of the, if not the best defender in the WNBA, because she can go out and guard your 2 or your 3 man, and obviously she's a phenomenal defender in a low post. And watching her perform on the defensive end last night, it spoke credence to all that. And it was really a masterclass performance on the defensive end. And, there's no question she was the main catalyst why Vegas was able to sweep Chicago in this first round matchup. But a more interesting series that is taking place in the WNBA so far is the matchup between the Lynx and the Sun. We're going to be covering all of that in our next segment, guys. So be sure to stick around. You are not going to miss it. All right, everybody, welcome back. In case you missed the first two segments of our show, we discussed the recent news in the NBA in regards to the Warriors planning to work out Dwight Howard and how that is a representation of your talent and your skill set being the least important factor when it comes to getting a job in the NBA. And I gave you some examples of some secondhand accounts that people I know personally that have experienced that. One of those being one of my friends that was on the Lakers roster or was on the Summer League roster in 2021, but they ended up signing Matt McClung instead of him because he was more marketable than this past season. Another friend of mine who was on the Cleveland Cavaliers or was potentially going to sign with the Cleveland Cavaliers, but they went with someone else, and so he ended up playing for the G League affiliate for the Cavs. In the second block, we talked about the Aces sweeping the Chicago Sky and the dominating performance that was put on by A'ja Wilson. And in our last segment, guys, we're going to talk about what it means to be like water and what is the similarities between Bruce Lee and Stephen Curry. But in this segment, guys, I want to talk about the most exciting matchup in the WNBA playoffs so far, and that's been the Lynx and the Sun. But before we get started, if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button as well, so you can stay up to date on all of our latest content. Be sure to subscribe to us on Patreon as well. You can do so by going to patreon.com, clicking on the search bar, and typing in GSMC Sports Network, so you can get access to all of our exclusive content that we post daily. And if you'd like to support our network and our company, you can do so by following the link in the ticker below. It's streamelements.com/GSMC-sportsnetwork./tip. Once again, it's streamelements.com/GSMC-sportsnetwork./tip. None of this is possible without you guys, the fans, and we're just so grateful for all support and the love that you guys show us by tuning into our shows every day. And it's an honor to share my insight and my knowledge of the game with you guys. So, that being said, let's get right into it. Guys, the most exciting match of the playoffs so far, no question, has been the Lynx and the Sun. The Sun won game 1 in dominating fashion by 30 points. And last night, the Lynx really pulled out a nail-biter. I know the score says they won 82-75, but watching the game, the game was much closer than the score would represent. The Lynx were led by Kayla McBride, who had a phenomenal game. Kayla McBride had 28 points, along with 8 rebounds, followed by Nafisa Collier, who had 26 points and 13 rebounds, followed by Dorka Juhas, who had 6 points and 5 rebounds, and Diamond Miller, who had 5 points and 2 assists. And this is a game where Diamond Miller actually towards the end of the game was regulated to the bench, but this is also a game where Nafisa Collier had back issues in the third quarter, and you could tell that she was struggling, and you could tell that it was difficult for her to get to her spots and to move with fluidity. But this was a grinded out game, and this was a nail biter, and there was a lot of grit that was shown on the Minnesota side, particularly by Nafisa Collier, who in that fourth quarter had 3 offensive rebounds that led to her getting a second chance bucket, and the other 2 times her getting to the free throw line. So that is what you want to see out of your leader and your star player, and for all intents and purposes, I believe the top 5 player in the WNBA. And followed by Kayla McBride, who really took on the point guard duties, because as we know, this Minnesota team doesn't really have a true point guard. They're more of a point guard by committee. That's how they've been playing this entire season. And like I said, she had 28 points and 8 rebounds, and she did a good job of shooting the ball. She went 6 for 11 from the 3-point line. She was attacking. She was aggressive early and often. And she did a good job of attacking those ball screens. However, what Connecticut did a good job of, when Dorka Juhas would come to set that ball screen for Kayla McBride, they would double that right away. And Connecticut did do a good job of generating a lot of turnovers on Minnesota with that double team off the pick and roll, especially the high pick and roll. And Minnesota didn't make enough adjustments, so they were able to pull out the win. If I'm Connecticut going into game 3, I'm seeing that, and that's something that I want to continue to do, because Minnesota clearly struggles with that because they don't have a true point guard. They struggle with those double teams off the high pick and roll. But if we look at Connecticut, they were led by DeWanna Bonner, who had 24 points and 5 rebounds and 2 assists, and Alyssa Thomas, who had 26 points, 6 assists and 5 rebounds. 8 rebounds. My apologies. And they both shot quite efficiently. Alyssa Thomas shot 10 for 18, while DeWanna Bonner shot 8 for 20. The issue was there wasn't much scoring outside of that, though, and Tiffany Hayes had 6 points. Letitia Heidemann didn't score at all. Carrington only had 5 points. As you know, she was in contention for sixth player of the year, but that was actually won by Alicia Clark yesterday. Nelson Adota only had 2 points coming off the bench, and Rebecca Allen only had she had 10 points as well. So there wasn't much scoring. There wasn't much efficient, or there wasn't much productivity outside of Dwana Bonner and Alyssa Thomas. So if we combine their scoring matchups, I mean they had 40 together. They had 40 of, sorry, not 40, 50. They had 50 of the 75 points for Connecticut. And frankly, this has been I know they're missing Bree Jones as well, who was a top 10 player in the league with Achilles rehab. And this is part of the reason why I picked Minnesota to win this series going into it, because the lack of depth and scoring by Connecticut. I mean, they have Carrington, who, like I said, who was a candidate for sixth player of the year, but there's just not enough consistent scoring to back up Alyssa Thomas and DeWanna Bonner, and you're asking these players to do a lot. Alyssa Thomas already leads the league in triple doubles and set the WNBA record for most triple doubles in a season. You got DeWanna Bonner, who for the fifth year in a row is averaging over 20 points. But these are also players who are getting a little up there in age, and that explosiveness isn't as consistent and starts to wane late in the game due to fatigue. But also is waning due to fatigue because you're asking them to do so much over the course of the game. And Connecticut will need to get help from, especially Natisha Heidemann, who, like I said, who not only did she not score, but she only shot the ball twice. And out of your point guard, yes, you want your point guard to facilitate, to run, orchestrate the offense, but it's just so much easier when your point guard is attacking and putting pressure on the defense at all times. And she only had 3 assists as well, which means that she wasn't being aggressive and hunting the paint and pushing tempo. So if you're Connecticut, you need more out of your point guard, and you need more out of Carrington as well, especially leading that charge from off the bench. But however, due to the playoff formatting for the WNBA, this final game is going to be in Minnesota because the first 2 home games were in Connecticut. And this is why I got a lot of pushback for this, but I picked Minnesota to win this series because of what I just stated about the lack of depth in Connecticut, but also because of the offensive firepower in Minnesota. And mind you, looking at this, they were able to win this game with both their rookies, Diamond Miller and Dorka Yuhas, both not being particularly aggressive and not shooting the ball particularly well. Particularly Diamond Miller, who shot 2 for 8. And like I said, Diamond Miller wasn't even on the court in the final moments of the game. She was replaced by Rachel Banham, the Minnesota, the University of Minnesota legend. But and Banham played well also. In terms of facilitating, she played a great job. She did a good job of filling the point guard role. She had 5 assists and 2 turnovers. And she didn't shoot the ball well. She shoots the ball above 33% from the 3-point line. So, however, she went 0 for 4 from the 3-point line yesterday. So don't expect to see that too often either. And this is a game where Minnesota didn't shoot the ball particularly well, but they still managed to pull out the win. And this is why I believe that Minnesota will win this game in Connecticut, or will win this game 3 on their home court in Minnesota. So like I said, I got a lot of pushback for that, but I'm sticking with my pick. I'm sticking with Minnesota winning the series in 3 games, just like we predicted last week. But guys, that's our recap for the WNBA playoff action so far. As you guys know, playoff action resumes on Tuesday, tomorrow, with the Mystics and Liberty and the Wings and the Dream matching up again. We'll have all that coverage for you as well. But in our last segment, guys, we are going to be covering the concept of what it means to be like water, and what are the comparisons between Bruce Lee and Steph Curry. Is there a correlation between the 2 guys? So guys, stick around. You're not going to miss any of that. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back. In case you missed previous segments in our show, we talked about the recent news in the NBA with the Warriors planning to bring in Dwight Howard for a workout, and how that represents what it's like for players attempting to get contracts in the NBA, and how your talent level and your skill set is really the least important factor when it comes to getting these deals. And the most important factor is, one, who your agent knows and who knows your agent, the relationship your agent has with GMs across the league, and your marketability. How easy is it for teams to market you in advertisements and on billboards and in commercials and things of that nature. Those are the biggest factors when it comes to getting a job in the NBA. We also covered some WNBA action. We talked about A'ja Wilson's dominant performance in Game 2 of the first round matchup with the Aces in the Sky. And we also covered an exciting Game 2 matchup between Minnesota and Connecticut, and why I'm sticking with my pick of Minnesota winning Game 3. But with this last segment, guys, I want to talk about the comparison between Bruce Lee and Steph Curry. And I know reading, and before I get into it, be sure to hit the subscribe and like button as well. Stay up to date on all of our latest content. But people see this tagline and they think to yourself, Bruce Lee, Steph Curry, like what can these two possibly have in common? What's the point of all this? And just like everything we do on the show, it's done with intentionality and it's done with purpose. And the reason I want to talk about the comparison between these two players, these two athletes, these two men, is because of their approach and their mindset when it comes to performances. I was listening to a Steph Curry interview that was done about, I want to say the interview was done in 2017, so about 6 years ago actually. And Steph Curry talked about how before each game, he gets nervous, extremely nervous, but what he does to counteract those nerves and to ground himself and center himself is he puts things into perspective, and he minimizes the gravitas of the moment by telling himself it's just a game, it's just basketball, it's not the end of the world, that there's bigger factors going on in the world than just basketball, that this performance doesn't define you and it doesn't dictate who you are as an individual. So he has that approach of, when it comes to grounding himself and being mentally ready to go into these matchups, into his games. And I was listening to that, and it sounded eerily similar to a thought process that Bruce Lee would have. Because I remember listening to a clip of Bruce Lee speaking. He talked about he liked to use the concept of being like water, in terms of having that mindset and being free flowing from state to state, and how when he would come into a match or into shooting for a movie or like I said, a sparring match or whatever, he would have that same approach where he would minimize the importance and the gravitas of that moment, of that match, of that filming, and remind himself that there's much more to life, to this world, to his purpose than just this moment, than this sparring match right here. And Bruce Lee said by him putting himself in that mindset, it took pressure off of him and allowed him to perform better in his matches and his battles and in his filming. And Steph Curry has that same approach as well. By having that approach takes pressure off of you, and it allows you to be more fluid and be more relaxed when you go out into the game, and you realize that it's not the end of the world. Whatever happens. And having that sort of approach, it allows you to be less stiff, and allows you to just go out there and play with fluidity and with a sense of relaxation. And that's where the concept of being like water comes from, where water can come in different states. It can come in come in a gas, a liquid, or a solid state. But no matter what what physical state that the water's in, at its core, it's still H2O. At its core, its essence is still the same no matter the physical state. And so being able to adapt and being able to be malleable to the conditions that you're in, and that's what it means to be like water. And being free flowing down a river, being able to flow and move despite the conditions, despite what obstacles may be in that river. Being able to adjust from the solid to the gas to the liquid, being malleable, knowing at your core is still H2O. You're still H2O. Your core, your inner core is still the same, but being malleable, being able to adjust based on the conditions that you're in. And that's what it means to be like water. And that's how Bruce Lee and Steph Curry, they have that commonality when it comes to that thought process. And it's no question that thought process is what propels them to success. Being able to be malleable and adjustable to the conditions that they're in, but knowing at their core they're free flowing, they're relaxed, they're much more than just an actor or a martial artist or a basketball player. Their performance isn't going to define them for the rest of their life. And that ability to ground yourself is so important when it comes to athletes, and when it comes to anyone in life in general. Being able to keep things in the proper perspective. And I just found it so interesting that it was Steph Curry, said something that was eerily similar to how Bruce Lee said something, and it's interesting how their viewpoints were very much in common. And there's no question in my mind now that anyone that is successful in life has to have that sort of approach, and it has to have that ability to be malleable and to that ability to ground themselves in that moment, in those moments of pressurized situations. And once you can, there's an old proverb as well that says, there is no enemy outside when there's no longer an enemy within. And it's just like that. Once you can master your inner self, once you can master your inner thoughts and your emotions, and not allow your emotions to control you and to lead you, but allowing your mental to be the strongest suit about you, then there is no outside circumstances that can, quote unquote, break you or can defeat you. And it's very true. Whether it be in your personal life, or whether it be in athletics or in any capacity, once there's no longer an enemy within, there's no longer an enemy outside. And that's something to remember moving forward. But Bruce Lee and Stephen Curry, it's no mistake that these two guys, who are both extremely successful in their craft, have the same mindset when it comes to being like water and rationalizing things and being grounded in the moment when it comes to pressurized situations, and taking pressure on themselves by understanding that this performance is not going to define them, and this moment isn't as big as they think it is. And that's something that we can all take from Bruce Lee and Steph Curry, is that mindset. But guys, that is all we have for our show today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, be sure to click that like button, click that subscribe button as well, so you can stay up to date on all of our latest content. Be sure to subscribe to us on Patreon as well. You can do so by going to patreon.com, clicking on the search bar, and typing in gsmcsportsnetwork.com, so you can get access to all of our exclusive content that we post daily. And if you'd like to support our company and our network, you can do so by following the link in the ticker below. It's streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Once again, it's streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. None of this is possible without you guys, the fans, so we're so grateful for all the love and support that you show us, and it's an honor to share my insight and my knowledge on the world of basketball with you guys. I know we do things from a little bit a different perspective, but I appreciate you guys listening and having the bandwidth to look at basketball from a more introspective perspective. But if you haven't already, be sure to tune into the GSMC Baseball Podcast, GSMC College Football Podcast, the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, and the GSMC NFL Podcast as well. All of our hosts provide great insight, and they're some of the best in the business. So they all do amazing work. But we'll be back again same time tomorrow, guys, 5:30 Eastern Time. Continue to stay safe, be vigilant, make smart decisions, and until next time, guys, peace.